Hi, I'm Doug, your tech support representative here at Atlantic British, and this video we're going to talk about master cylinders, specifically master cylinder for the Discovery 2 1999 to 2004, where you find that going down the road you step on the brake pedal, the pedal goes 3/4 of the way to the floor, you pump it up, pedal comes up nice and hard and actually ends up where it should be. You've checked the brakes, you've looked at the slides, you make sure everything is operating right, you've bled the system out, and yet you still have this sloppy pedal. And essentially what's happening is they're starting to develop a buildup inside the master cylinder, allowing the seals to basically not do their job. They don't completely seal. So you need to pump the pedal to be able to get a good stoppable pedal. So what we're going to do is discuss about master cylinder. Essentially all this does is deliver the pressure to the system. Now these are a little different than most, and what you have basically is a secondary or reservoir or a pull for your back brakes here in this plastic piece, which means that it's very hard to what they call a bench bleed, and a lot of shops will put a master cylinder in a vise and manually move this and bleed the system out and then install it on the vehicle. On these you need to install first, and then you're going to either use a pressure bleeder or you're going to have someone, a helper in the vehicle, pump the pedal while you bleed that part of the brakes out. So we're going to show you essentially how to change one of these over. They're relatively easy. It's nothing more than just the two brake lines and the two bolts, and then we'll show you how to bleed it in the vehicle. Alright, so to remove the master cylinder, first thing we're going to do is disconnect the electrical connector for the fluid sensor. And that's just a matter of spread these outer tabs a little bit while you're pulling back on the connector. And move that out of the way. We don't want to be pouring any brake fluid in there too as we're removing that. And we'll leave the cap on for now. And you've got two brake lines. They're going to be a 13mm fitting, one here and one towards the back. We'll crack those loose and disconnect those. And you may want to stick a rag. We'll stick a couple rags down in that hollow right down there. We've moved that heat shield out a little bit. It bends very easy, and we'll pack some rags down in there so that the brake fluid that drips down isn't going to get all over the chassis. Alright, so we've got the two lines disconnected. I popped them out of their little retainers here just so we could move them up a little bit. They will bend. Don't worry about putting a little twist in them. They're going to move right back into place. So now we're going to take the nut off. There's a nut right here and a nut up at a 45-degree angle up in the top corner. Now I use a half-inch socket, believe it or not. These are not metric, these are half-inch. So a half-inch swivel socket, deep, so it'll fit over the stud. And I like the long extension because then I can just sort of snake it in there. The top one is the harder one to get to, so we'll do that one first. And then once we've got that out, we're going to connect to the bottom one, take that out. Once the two nuts are out, the master cylinder is just going to slide forward and up and out of the booster. So we've taken the two nuts out. Essentially this is ready to come out. You're going to grab yourself a container or whatnot. What's going to happen is we'll pull this out, we'll dump the fluid out of this into a container. We're not going to reuse it. Don't ever reuse old brake fluid. You want to put fresh, clean, right out of a sealed bottle. Just is an overall better aspect. So we'll pull this forward. Container. Definitely don't want to drip brake fluid. If you get any brake fluid on the front fender or on the paint or whatnot, take a wet rag and wipe it off immediately. If you leave it there for too long, it may end up staining the clear coat on the paint. And you can basically tell by the color of this fluid you wouldn't want to reuse it because there's some material in there. And that's the sludge that essentially builds up inside these, which ends up causing them to fail, giving you a weak pedal. So we'll let that drain in the container, and in the meantime we'll slide the new one in place. Now you heard that pop when we take it off. You'll notice that the O-ring that would normally be around that plastic has held its position in the booster. You want to make sure you get that old O-ring off of the booster before you install the new. And there it is. So you want to make sure you got that old one out of there before you install the new master cylinder so that you end up with a good seal. You want to take a rag, wipe the inside of the bore, the opening that's in the booster, because that's where that O-ring is going to seal. So you want to make sure you got a good clean surface there. Alright. And we're ready to install the new master. Alright, just a quick note. You'll notice that once you get the master cylinder out, if you look inside the booster, there's a stem, a stud basically in the center, and that's part of your actuator from your brake pedal. You want to make sure that when you insert the master cylinder, that stud ends up inside the center of the master and not bent and pushed over to the outside. So that's something you want to keep an eye on when you install this on there. Easy way to tell is once you get this on and bolted, before you get into bleeding the brakes and whatnot, you just hit the accelerator pedal. If it's off, the pedal will not go all the way to the floor. It'll end up catching about halfway down. That's because that stud is cocked to the side and cannot make full travel. So we install the master cylinder, we get it locked down on the booster. We wait a few minutes, and what will happen is the fluid will eventually fill up and down inside the master cylinder in the sleeve, and then it'll start running out of the two connections for the lines. At that point, we'll put the two lines back on, but we didn't tighten them. We just snugged them in so that it would stop leaking for a bit, and then we would top them off again. And the Land Rovers, generally all the Land Rovers across the board, are going to use a .4 brake fluid. So make sure that whatever brake fluid you use a .4. Do not go to a .5 synthetic. The seals in these master cylinders are not made to work with that fluid. Use a .4 specification fluid only. You'll find some that will do .3 and .4, and that's fine. That'll work just fine. So what we're going to do at this point is we need to bleed this system. Probably the best way to do this is to have someone sit in the vehicle and pump the pedal. And what you're going to do, essentially, you'll start from the front. You'll have them press down on the pedal while you back off the line. When they reach bottom of pedal travel, you have them stop, snug the line back down, have them let up, pump the pedal a few times, loosen it up again. And you're going to do that several times on both the front and the back until you see no air bubbles. Okay, so we bled the brakes, basically bled the master cylinder as described. Had somebody pump it and then just plug it up, back these off, and then you only have to back a half a turn, and it'll squirt out. When you see no bubbles, you're done. You have no air. You lock them back down. Just the possibility that some air has gotten into these lines and up through, you may want to bleed the brakes, which you can refer to our video on how to bleed the brakes on a D2. We generally recommend, because the factory recommends and states that the best way to bleed these is the three-way or the three-step brake bleeding. That includes using a diagnostic tool to activate the pump on the ABS unit and then to do the power bleed afterwards. Some people will say you can do without. You can just do a regular pump and bleed, or put a pressure bleeder on it, and that works fine, but you only end up with about 3/4 of a decent pedal. You want to make sure with brakes we're not fooling around. Do it right. Do it with a diagnostic tool and get all the air out of the system. So you've essentially seen now how to replace the master cylinder. At this point we just put the cap back on and pull the wire around, reconnect the sensor, and that's basically it. We've changed the master cylinder, and you can actually do this within an hour's worth of time. If you decide to bleed the brakes, that'll add a little bit of time, but it'll still be doing it right. So should you find you need a master cylinder for your 99 to 2004 Disco 2, just call any of our knowledgeable salesmen at 1-800-533-2210, and thanks for watching.